We're ready to begin our session this afternoon. May I invite our moderator, Omayr Aziz Saiyid, to please come on stage. And our guest for this afternoon, Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar, to please come on stage. Introducing our moderator for this afternoon, Omayr Aziz Sayyid is a political analyst with an interest in Pakistani politics and national security affairs. Over to you, Omayr.
Thank you. First of all, welcome to Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar. It's a great honor to have you at our event. Hina needs no introduction, but just a brief background would be in order. Hina has been a leading Pakistani political figure, graduating with a BSc honors from Lahore University of Management Sciences and later a master's in business management from University of Massachusetts in Amherst. She's the daughter of veteran politician Mr. Ghulam Rabbani Khar and the niece of senior politician Mr. Ghulam Mustafa Khar. Ms. Khar was elected as member of National Assembly from Muzaffargarh in 2002. As MNA, she served as Parliamentary Secretary for Economic Affairs from 2003 to 2005 and then as Minister of State for Economic Affairs. Re-elected in 2008, she continued her assignment as Minister of State for Economic Affairs, which was one of the things I would like to discuss. You were the only minister who continued her portfolio in the two governments. And later on, she moved to Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, which is the big thing we would like to discuss, and everybody has, I'm sure, questions about. From 2011 to 2013, Ms. Khar was the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs and is best remembered for development of the regional pivot role for Pakistan's foreign policy, concentrating on rebuilding ties with Pakistan's immediate neighbors and beginning the normalization of trade relations with India. Ms. Khar is married and has two daughters and a son. So Ms. Khar, to start with a little bit about your personal life. I mean, you've had, background from a political family from southern Punjab, rural constituency. But yet you were raised in, I think, Lahore, and you studied at the leading institutions in Pakistan and also internationally. So how did, what role did that background play in your development as a person and later as a politician?
Okay, first of all, let me say this. We often, as politicians, have to say things we don't really believe or mean. But really, it's a big pleasure to be here and to see such a varied crowd and to see so many people. And I'm sure you would want to talk about it, but we owe it a bit to the lack of presence of Anupam Kher that we have such a big audience over here. But nevertheless, okay, to answer your question directly, I think it had a huge role to play because I believe that people in Pakistan are divided into not only classes, but the urban class and also the rural class. And I believe that there is quite a bit of a disconnect between the two. As somebody who had access to both, I've considered myself privileged in multiple ways because, as a norm in our family, we used to spend all our vacations, including the 3 months of summer vacations, typically, within the village. So in the village, in some ways, whereas it is generally believed that the feudal class, etc., the peasants versus the feudal class, etc. At some level, the class structure is different in the villages. You coexist with the people who work for you, and you grow up with, the children of the people who work for you, and you get access to the fact that so much in Pakistan remains to be done, and how underprivileged the vast majority of people are. And you cannot get a sense living in Lahore or Karachi, the lack of development, the lack of roads, the lack of sanitation, the lack of the very, very basic infrastructure that would normally require to be there for a normal life to be lived.
Normal life.
Yeah.
And in these kind of areas, people are just, is that something people have become used to, or is that like still big issues that people are, demanding or talking about, or
No, I
bringing
think
up with people like you?
I don't think it's possible within the democratic dispensation or in an undemocratic dispensation for people to ever get used to a way of life which is
Justice.
not ideal. And I would maybe want to share with this crowd, it is generally believed that in areas like the one that I represent from Muzaffargarh, there is absolutely no demand for girls' education, for instance, right?
Okay.
And we put it to test, okay? And
Right.
typically, as you get safarish for jobs, now you get safarish, for instance, in the school that my mother runs for 250 girls for children to go there because they're getting free quality education. And because they're also, the state cannot provide it. For instance, if you provide them the transport to be able to reach the school,
yeah.
there's a huge demand, even without the transport. And I sometimes think about the commitment that we show in our children's education versus the commitment that they show. Because for them, if there are 2 trucks which are hauling up all the girls, they have to get out of the house sometimes at 5 o'clock in the morning and reach their house back at 5 p.m. How many of us will put our children through that grind for, a questionable quality of education, but they are. So the demand is always there. It is our failure to be able to meet that
It has
demand.
been there. So you were actually spending a large part of your time in Muzaffargarh, in your family lands, while you were living in Lahore mostly. Yeah.
Gee, for education we were in Lahore, but for everything else we were in
For
the
everything
village.
else, you were. You went to the Lahore University of Management Sciences. How was that experience? Is that something you fondly remember? Or?
No, no. Sorry for all the IBS there, but it is the premier school, I believe, in many, many ways. And once I went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, I realized that in Pakistan, in some ways, the premier institutions, which includes IBA, and the excellent work that Dr. Ishrat Hussain is doing over there. I mean, I've witnessed it firsthand also.
Right.
So in Pakistan, the premier institutions actually give us Pakistanis the best, most well-rounded education. I would, in any day, give up my experience at Massachusetts, at Amherst, for my experience at LUMS.
LUMS.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think a lot of people, forget the IBA LUMS rivalry, but they would agree with that, people who've graduated from LUMS or from IBA, and, they're doing internationally competitive, positions, jobs, work-wise. So you were talking about, how you worked for girls' education and those issues in your villages, but also in your personal life, you were a very keen sports enthusiast. You played polo, you did mountain climbing. Is that also like a part of your, an example you wanted to set for women, or is that just like an interest? Is that something just come and gone?
I would love to take credit for it as, saying that that's an example I wanted to set. But really, I was introduced. I've always been very, very inclined towards sports of every type. Horse riding was a passion that I had since the day, I remember. And, it's something that I pursued vigorously at every level. And it was something in some ways which was path-breaking because, typically women to be trying their hand at polo and horse riding in the village is not very acceptable. And I give my father a lot of credit for allowing us to do whatever we thought we wanted to do. Mountain trekking is something that I would want to inspire people to do because, we all take time out and go to the Swiss Alps, here, there, and everywhere. And what Pakistan has to offer, and again, it's LUMS that exposed me to it because the first trip I took to the base camp of Nanga Parbat was as a LUMS group, as part of LUMS Adventure Society. And you saw the vistas. It's two-dimensional. I think one is just the beauty and the diversity in the topography in Pakistan. It just strikes you, okay? Because there's these beautiful streams and roaring rivers and very, very large mountains, which are very, very overwhelming. And it's a humbling experience to be on a trek where you have to really push yourself beyond your imagination and go persevere and keep at it. So there's that part of it. But the other, I think, more important part is that, so there's that part of, wanting to see what is in your country. But mountaineering in itself as an experience, which I already said, an exceptionally humbling experience, something that teaches you the limits of, what man thinks we've taken over the world, right? And yet, if you're stuck in a snowstorm on the top of a mountain peak or even on your way up on the base camp, well, there's not much that you have at your disposal. And also that more than physical perseverance, on the mountain what counts is mental perseverance.
Strength,
so I saw many of the colleagues, or friends who went with me who were physically much more fit, who collapsed, and some who were physically much less fit who kept on going. And I love mountaineering, because unlike polo, it's something which doesn't handicap you as a woman. Because with polo, to be quite honest, the only sport or the only thing in the world where I felt, okay, just because I was a woman,
handicapped.
I didn't have the strength in my arms to be able to play as well as my, contemporaries who joined with me. But mountaineering, no. You can.
And all the other players were men in your people you played
Actually,
polo
yeah,
with?
at that time they were.
So you're used to this role as being the only woman in the room.
I guess so.
Great. So, moving on beyond LUMS, you also had a successful business before you joined your, political career. So how did that transition happen? Is that something that was given, like a day one, it was an assumption that you're going to be a politician one day, or is that some development, a personal choice?
Yes, I think a combination of the two. It wasn't, for instance, a career that I was trying to pursue. And by the way, the successful business that I ran came simultaneously with my politics. So 2002 was the year that I joined politics, and 2002 was the year that I joined the successful business, which I had a interestingly and a humongously unsuccessful one. So, because a lot of times people people feel that you get on the trajectory of success, and it is in some ways, one opportunity leads to another. That certainly happens. But there are many, many things which you do in the meanwhile which may not be that successful. And I think the lesson, or at least for me, the lesson learned was that, I never thought of them as something which kept me from doing something else. And in doing something else, sometimes you're much more successful. I'm talking purely business. I'm not comparing business and politics and saying I've been successful as a politician.
Yeah.
I think the jury is still out there. But certainly on the business front, because I always like to encourage young girls and young boys to have an entrepreneurial spirit. And I really enjoy the work that I do both ways. So
Setting up a restaurant from scratch, without a background in that industry, was that something that must have been a huge challenge? How did that come about?
because I was 24 and not 35. Honestly, because I think now you know so much about how you might fail. When you're younger, you don't. You can just get into anything. And if you do, and before that, by the way, at the age of 24, 23, this might be an interesting story, because I came back from my master's degree and I told my father that he was not managing our farms well at all, and I will manage them better for him. So I told him that the mango orchards that he was just selling to the Aarti may not go to the Aarti, and I will try and export it for him. So I put in his good money and my skill set to it. And after 3 months of spending time in the mandi and going through all sorts of interesting experiences, luckily I didn't lose him money, but I certainly didn't make him any.
Okay. So the Aarti ended up buying the mangoes.
The Aarti in Germany ended up buying the mangoes.
Oh, you did? Okay. So the consignment did go abroad.
Yeah, many of them. It was a very interesting experience. I think, again, it was a great learning experience. And it's something, because if you do something real time, it guides you when you're doing policy at some level.
So did your father encourage you to go into politics? Or, why would he not? There must have been lots of family members, lots of cousins to choose from, lots of siblings.
No, I had an elder brother.
Yeah?
So the myth that girls only come into politics if they don't have elder brothers or younger brothers, I think was broken. My father and I have a very good working relationship. So he just asked me if I would be up to it. I thought I was. And of course, he was the only encouraging, he was the force behind me coming in, I guess.
And so when you did take the plunge, in a constituency like Muzaffargarh, you were obviously your family's whole network counts for a lot. So how does the election campaign, or how does the dynamics work in a place like that? Compared to whoever lost to your elections, is that something your campaigns had a lot to do with it, your own personal
Again, can't take credit
relationships,
for that.
networks?
I think 2002 elections were purely on the basis of the work that my father had done since 1985 as an MPA. And again, it is generally believed the Khar name will make you win, right?
Right.
My uncle, who is a much more well-known Khar name than my father, lost both those elections, right?
Okay.
On simultaneous seats. And and that's not taking credit away from his political career at all, but because in some ways you have to, in some ways, not in some ways, actually in more than one ways, realistically speaking, in Pakistan, being in the legislative assembly and being a parliamentarian is less about the legislation that you do and more about the contact that you have at the grassroots, and more about the availability that you have with the people, if you're able to deliver in any way to their small problems, big problems, from schools to electricity is a big issue, roads, farm to market roads is a big issue. So if the people feel that you're there, to be able to deliver in whatever is your capacity, I think they develop an affinity for you.
So it's a lot of, it's not so much national issues that people are voting on, it's more
in
your own
Muzaffargarh, it is,
contacts,
I would say, 20% not even national issues. It's very, very localized. It's very much who will do what. And yes, I'm saying 20% because I think it's also increasing.
Right.
The media has played a huge role in the general awareness of people with national issues. But national issues also, when they are localized in some ways. For instance, over there, what will be an issue that they will count on you to project is how worse off the southern Punjab is versus central Punjab. So that will be a local issue, right? And now I will look at it from a national perspective, but to them that is very local. To them the fact that there's so many massive roads and metros and everything else being built in Lahore, when in Muzaffargarh even a small farm to market road will be a challenge and a half, which will take them 5 years to maybe get the sanctions and 10 years to build, is obviously a sense of unfairness which comes deeply into their system.
Right. So, one interesting thing about Mr. Ghulam Mustafa Khar was that I wanted to bring up in 1988, he himself won his own seat and he had multiple seats and he actually gave one seat to Ghulam Mustafa Jatoi because he had lost his own seat. So, he could control multiple seats in that area at a time. But now things are, you were saying things are changing. He actually loses elections sometimes. Is that some national thing that's development is going on? Or
I think primarily when he won those many seats, this will become a session on my uncle, but when he won those many seats, there were some people who won those many seats on his behalf who were not very, because, who were not doing what they should have been doing, to put it, in a small.
Right.
So I guess that has an impact. So this general belief in the cosmopolitan cities of Pakistan that the urban people are smart and know what they want, and the rural people are dumb and really are so under the influence of some bigger people that they cannot decide what is best for them. I would, just knowing that, I would want to typically challenge
that's evolving,
Certainly.
You have a greater number of people. There's more competition even in rural seats.
Sure.
You find.
Sure. There's no dearth of competition, I can tell you.
So, when you did join politics, your family had a history with the Pakistan People's Party, but you joined the Muslim League, Q. So, how did that, what was the reason behind that?
Actually, my father was more or less within the same group, larger group.
Okay.
So, that wasn't such a big decision.
So, it wasn't a change that you brought about,
No, not at all.
Is that and you became the State Minister for Finance within 2 years of joining the government. And that was a very, other than the politics side, which we will come to, but finance ministry and the economic, there was a huge boom in our economy. In the Musharraf years, everything seems to be working out, and there were a lot of theories about why we suddenly rebounded. One is basically the detractors would say that it was just because US aid started coming and the Americans like to support the military, and it's easy to run the economy well when as an increase in aid. Or the other thing is that things were actually better managed. There was better governance, better policies. What do you think was the cause of the boom?
I think first of all, I am not such a great believer, and by the way, I was Minister of State for Economic Affairs, whereas Omayr Khan was the Minister of State for Finance. So I was basically managing all the bilateral and multilateral assistance that comes into Pakistan, which includes USAID and World Bank and ADB, etc. And I generally believe that in Pakistan, we always overestimate the importance of aid or assistance to Pakistan and the role it has in our economy. And, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, who I believe to be my mentor and many, many things, and somebody I look up to for, the many, many things that he's done for Pakistan at the, on the ground, real time stuff. He's also written a great article on it, which proves that it's not assistance money which is so running the economy of Pakistan. It is actually exaggerated immensely. So I think primarily in that era, there were some drastic reforms which were done, right? Which was opening up of the economy, deregulation, privatization, and all of that had an impact.
Right.
All of that also had an impact because we were in a world economy cycle which was very, very good. Okay, we all know that era was an era of boom. And post 9/11, obviously Pakistan got a lot of benefits which could be balance of payment oriented, right? I don't want to get too technical on this, but stuff which gave fiscal space to you because our loans were rescheduled, etc., etc. So we got some fiscal space and we got a good international environment, and then we were able to create a local atmosphere which would encourage investment. For instance, currently there was a lot of FBR reform done at that time.
So fiscal space was well utilized.
Fiscal space was well utilized, whereas if you talk about today with close to $7 to $10 billion of fiscal space that you have gotten only on the head of lower oil prices, we don't see that being utilized. So the difference between able to utilize that well as opposed to not being able to utilize it, I guess, is what did it then.
Right. And our economic reforms were these, other than privatization? Privatization really picked up pace, and as you said that as balance of payments situation improved, it allowed you to improve your credit ratings, and all those things had a snowball effect. But in terms of other reforms, you talked about tax reforms and FBR reforms. Can you tell us more about that? How did that impact the economy? What reforms are you talking about?
No, I think certainly the tax reforms, I believe, are now in this regime. In the People's Party regime, we try to carry the reform process on. In this regime, they have actually collapsed because they have actually gone to the prehistoric times of ensuring that they keep the liquidity of the private sector by design, by choice, by policy. And they believe in this police state type of management of, whether it's FBR or any other thing. So
Capacity
at that
taxes.
time, the FBR went through a drastic reform. Okay, it was entrusting and interacting with the private sector, giving them space, taking some space, and that actually increased your overall revenue collection quite a bit. Yeah,
it did. Yeah, and as the economy continued, towards the last end, another thing is that oil prices had started shooting up.
Sure.
Which was creating a burden. And obviously after 2008, 2009 is when
it really
the economy did actually, there was a huge depreciation of our currency, there was a balance of payments crisis. Was that like a long time in the making, or is that something that happened with the new government? Why did the economy just suddenly
I think
collapse?
if there's one thing I will fault that particular time, because I don't want to talk about, I don't want to politicize this, and already we're overly politicizing, typically, by we I mean generally we have a tendency to. So I think the fatal flaw in that time was not giving enough attention to the looming electricity crisis in that time, as the fatal flaw today, I believe, is not giving, by today I mean over time, not giving enough attention to the water crisis that is looming. We are one of the most water scarce countries in the world, and we don't seem to give a damn about it almost, right? So in the Musharraf era, the electricity crisis was already looming, right? Oil prices were increasing. Our fixation or the bulk of our electricity was coming through
from
oil
furnace
and furnace oil. And what became the circular debt crisis, which hit the PPP government in the face, was already in the making in the last 2 years, in some ways, of the Musharraf government. And because the elections were coming, etc., it was managed in such a way that it really didn't hit.
Tried to kick the can down the road,
and then it hit us, right? Because during that time, I think clearly not enough attention was given to starting new projects which are not oil or furnace oil based. Clearly, I think all governments successively have failed to give attention to hydropower, and there are good reasons for that. The provincial, federal trust deficit has obviously contributed to that. So in that way, I believe that within the People's Party regime, what we were able to do with the 18th Amendment to the Constitution was path-breaking, and I think it should have long-term ramifications and effects which should start to show as soon as we are able to build the capacity and the capability within the provinces to be able to fully internalize and take the responsibilities that constitutionally have always been with the provinces, but the provinces have never developed the capacity or capability to be able to take on those responsibilities. So those provinces which will take on that process well,
For
will
example,
certainly-
like
for example, everything, you know,
Taking power.
education, health, agriculture, extension services, sanitation. You know, there was a ministry, how can you justify sitting in Islamabad for 180 million people, 700,000 square kilometers, sanitation, a ministry which is taking care of sanitation, or agriculture. Agriculture is exceptionally localized. You know, I'm trying to, one of my sisters is now seriously delving into agriculture, and when we try and look for information on agriculture, it's very difficult to find some. Right? So extension services in Pakistan for an agrarian-based economy is in the dumps. So as the provinces probably get into this healthy competition, hopefully some of those things will...
There's some criticism of the 18th Amendment that already you have resource mobilization is a huge challenge for the center. But the 18th Amendment has handed over a lot of fiscal powers to the provinces, and the center is going to have to rely on more and more on things that it's weak in collecting. For example, income tax is pretty much the main revenue source now. Is that something that concerns you, or is that something we have to...
You know, what concerns me is that we try sometimes or decide sometimes advertently to be so oblivious to the reality of a diverse Pakistan. You know, we like to believe that Islamabad, with its, you know, however 100 kilometers of land, with its, you know, bureaucrats and with its politicians, can manage all of Pakistan. You know, it is us denying the provinces the ability to be able to manage their own resources and to be able to benefit from it themselves, which has put Pakistan in the space that it is today. So, you know, for instance, in Balochistan, with all the gas reserves, etc., why have we not been able to exploit it? And why does a country like Pakistan need to export gas, not being able to exploit its own reserves? It's because we have not been able to build that trust with the Baloch people. And again, another Karachiite that I would like to give a lot of credit to is Shaukat Tareen, who singularly, almost single-handedly, at the back of course, the Pakistan People's Party, managed to do the NFC after, 17, 16 years? Meaning, is this even normal in a federation that you do not give the provinces their due share and then say, oh, you know, so how is their capacity going to be built? So all the people who crib about the 18th Amendment and how it's not done, of course it's not done well for Pakistan in the immediate future. But in the longer term, I think it's correcting a lot of wrongs which have really become very, very deep-rooted. And the wrongs to the extent of, you know, some of the extremist terrorism also. All of these things are interconnected. Denying people their right to be able to benefit from what is theirs is incapacitating in so many multiple levels, much more than is our imagination, I believe.
And it would always create conflict.
Sure.
Another criticism, one more criticism of the 18th Amendment was that, yes, there was devolution. I mean, it's known as, you know, the devolution plan. But people say it's ironic because a lot of powers were devolved from the center to the provinces. But in the provinces, within provinces, it was the opposite, that whatever local government had been set up in the previous government, those were all abolished and powers were actually centralized into the provincial capitals.
Sure.
So is that a problem, or is that something that we have to...
No, I mean, just look at the facts, right?
Yeah.
Instead of one center of power, if we have 4 centers of power, that is still better than one center of power. But it is certainly not better than 354 or however many centers of power. So if we were unable to do that, which we hopefully now will do, then you cannot say that the first thing was incorrect. You can say that the second thing that did not happen was incorrect, to put it in perspective.
Right. You think in terms of the local government, which is also started in the previous government, in the Musharraf government, was that a successful experiment? How did that work in, for example, different parts of urban or rural areas, in your experience?
It worked very differently in different parts. So those Nazims, so to speak, who were, or district administrators, whatever, you know, district Nazims, who were keen to do development and who were not using their funds elsewhere, it worked wonderfully for them. So by and large, I think local governance system is something that will work for Pakistan rather than against it, as more provincialism and more power to the provinces will work for Pakistan as opposed to it. So it should eventually, and it will hopefully.
And now we are hopefully going back to a system of local government. We'll see how that works. Moving on from the economy, more into your later role as foreign minister, or even before that, you were still at M&A, and you're still, I'm sure, on the cabinet, so dealing with these issues. But national security has kind of been dominating discourse in the overall political discussions for some reason. Even though a lot of people think that economic policies and those things should be considered more important, but the war on terror started in 2001, big crisis. Pakistan was kind of, facing, being, as they said, between a rock and a hard place. So, what was your role in that policy making level, or were you involved in it at all? And how do you think that played out? Did we make any mistakes? Should we have done things differently, like 2001 onwards?
That will be a very long story. 2001 onwards will be a very long story. I think intrinsically I was more involved with the security paradigm of Pakistan or the security policy of Pakistan as foreign minister. So I would maybe want to just talk about that time.
Okay.
Because, I believe also as politicians we shouldn't give judgments on things that we haven't been very closely involved with, because it's important to talk from experience. So within that, I think, historically one thing that Pakistan, I believe, has done wrong is that Pakistan has chosen, or Pakistan has seen its importance in the world as a function of a bit of a nuisance value, right? So we've always wanted a role in countries far off and nearby, right? So my favorite line to everybody who wanted to fix Afghanistan was, let's go and fix Balochistan first, which is part of Pakistan. Then we can worry about fixing Afghanistan later, right?
Excellent, yeah.
So we typically, and I will share with you because I think it's important now, as Foreign Minister of Pakistan, not because I was young and a woman, that probably had a role to play with it, and maybe 10%, to be honest. But as a Foreign Minister of Pakistan, whenever I traveled abroad, be it Washington, D.C., London, New York for the General Assembly sessions, or even Kabul or India, New Delhi, etc., so forget New Delhi and Kabul. There, a Foreign Minister of Pakistan's role should be there. It should be important, and it should be sort of, newsworthy. But in New York, when I would be with 180 other foreign ministers, in the same room, and they would complain about their press offices not being able to get them an appointment or a meeting or a, session and an interview with Christiane Amanpour, etc., etc. And the likes of that name were running after us for time, right? So I would kid with my Malaysian colleague, for instance, that I wish I were in your place, because your country is doing well in a way that the other people don't need your time, they don't want to know what's going to happen, how are you going to blow yourself up type, that's, and in some ways we think this importance is good for Pakistan. I think it is anything but good for Pakistan. The role that we want on the table has been something which has created a lot of problems for Pakistan. Had we not played the role that we played in the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and how we decided to let our soil, our people's minds, most importantly, everybody else had a role to play. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar maybe, UK, European Union, many countries, the US, big role, gigantic role. Huge amounts of money came in, right? Huge amounts of sort of mental, whatever we were taught came in. We remember, was it Wolfowitz who went and, on the top of a peak, a mountain or a hill in Fata, and said that your Allah had been attacked and you go back and protect your Allah, and this type of mainstreaming of violent thoughts. So everybody else put in the money and the brain power, right? We were the only ones who allowed our people and our soil to be used. Now everybody else had an exit strategy. They said, okay, money's gone, war won, we move on with, nation building, whatever they do. What exit strategy that we had? What exit strategy did we have? We had no exit strategy, and we had allowed our soil to be penetrated by extremist thought, and we had allowed, more importantly, our minds to be. The Zia era has probably done worse for this country than any other. era.
Right.
Without any doubt to anyone's mind. And all of this cannot be undone in days or months or, frankly speaking, even in decades. What we did, what we sowed in 3 decades cannot be undone in 3 years. But are we going on the trajectory of undoing it? I like to believe we are, so I'm generally optimistic.
Yeah, it's been a long, journey in that direction, but are we actually, given there was a book called Reaping the Whirlwind, so there's been a lot of blowback to policies of trying to influence Afghanistan, but is it the case that we don't have the capacity to deal with it in a black and white manner? Are we still, or is the policy not as black and white as it seems to be? I mean, have we actually gone beyond strategic depth at a strategy policy level?
I hope we have.
Yeah.
I like to believe we have, and I like to believe that we also in our time did a lot. For instance, I'm very proud of the fact, and I often boast about it, and I think I deserve to boast about it, that as Foreign Minister of Pakistan for almost 2 years, little over that, every one of my predecessors would have traveled to DC, Washington DC, maybe 3, 4, 5 times, right? I traveled to DC for a bilateral visit once, and I traveled to Kabul as Foreign Minister thrice and as Minister of State maybe 2 more times. So altogether 6 times within that 3-year period. Okay? To Kabul. Because I believe that it is extremely important that Pakistan first changes its approach, its historical approach, not today's approach, hopefully, its historical approach towards Kabul, and 2, even more importantly, to let the people in Afghanistan know that Pakistan has changed and is changing, because it's always an evolutionary process, right? So you'll change it at the heads level, but it will take a while before it will penetrate down. So we wanted to make sure that the Afghans also understood it. So a lot of time was spent with the people in Afghanistan, and not just the government. And one of my favorite things to do over there was to reach out to the non-Pashtun leaders in Afghanistan. Because what is Pakistan's business to choose who is best for Afghanistan?
Right.
As a sovereign state, we owe them the respect to respect their decision as to whoever is best to lead them, whether it's a Tajik or a Pashtun or a Uzbek or a whoever, a Panjshiri or a minority. It's their call. It's and it will. In Kabul, I think Afghanistan is a complicated, it's probably the only country in the world which is, or at least in our region, which is even more complicated than Pakistan, right? And unfortunately, Pakistan got the flack of much more than we deserved. So we had historically a bad role to play in Afghanistan.
Right.
At that time, it was we believed it was the correct role, but later on, it turned out to be something that didn't work for us, it didn't work for the Afghans. But what is ascribed to Pakistan's largesse, the role, is much more than what Pakistan deserves. I think all of the collective failures of the ISAF and the NATO and the US, now reports over reports, a recent NATO report which was leaked because they would never put that information out there for us, said that out of 100 or so units, 1 unit works and in Syria, out of the, God knows, $500 million which was spent, they have 5 soldiers to show for what they've done. 5 soldiers, yeah. Literally. So this is how wars are being fought nowadays.
And the army now, Afghan army has a 30% desertion rate per year.
Yes. 8 per day.
8 per day. Yeah. So obviously there are a lot of problems there.
But all of the flack of everything that went wrong came on Pakistan, and I thought that was very unfair. So we wanted to try our best to ensure that people understood that Pakistan, if had a historical fascination with the Pashtuns or thought that Pakistan knew better than Afghanistan, Pakistan does not believe that anymore. And we wanted the Afghans to know that as much as was possible.
As Afghanistan also shares some blame in the policies that have developed over the years, Afghanistan has always laid claim to Pakistani territory. They've always refused to recognize the Durand Line. And they still do, even in our governments, the Karzai government and later on. They're very aggressive about not recognizing the Durand Line. So you think that's something that people don't talk about? They should share some blame? Obviously, we are going to be distrustful about.
To be quite honest, I think the Durand Line is something which is best left on the back burner right now, because currently we have so many dynamic, existential issues which are staring us in the face, that to bring up an issue like this, which is obviously going to be a dividing issue, it's not going to be something that... So I used to always say that if you want to seek strategic depth in Afghanistan, seek it by empowering them and earning their trust. That is the biggest strategic depth that Pakistan can have in Afghanistan. So that fascination with trying to develop strategic depth through the wrong means is obviously something that came and hit us on our faces, right? So it is important. I believe that change has been engendered within Pakistan's mainstream. I believe that. I truly believe that.
Mainstream.
However, to get the Afghans to fully understand and recognize that. Now, what you asked about Afghanistan, I think Afghanistan has a lot of blame to be shared, right? Because it's the way the Afghans choose to manage their own country eventually, which is leading Afghanistan to become. And, there are accounts now of, for instance, that famous Bergdahl, the person who apparently deserted the US army and went and sided with the Taliban. There are instances that were not acceptable to US military on the ground, right? What they saw over there, how they saw. So it's quite 50% of the blame as 50% of the or 100% of the responsibility has to be borne by the Afghan people. So the Afghan elite, I think, found it very easy to blame Pakistan for everything that went wrong.
And they do also, there's a lot of hysteria being whipped up about Pakistan, even, recently or while. And, we can put the Durand line to the back burner, but I don't know if that's happening on their end. They're still talking about the role that Pakistan played and the...
how do we change that? The only way to change it by giving them confidence. We are the elder brother. We always say, the India is the bigger country. We are always, everything they do against us, etc. We expect them to be generally, giving in some ways, right? In the very same way and in a much bigger way. The ISI in Afghanistan is considered the CIA in Pakistan. So everything that goes wrong in Pakistan is because of the CIA. Everything that goes wrong to the Afghan is because of the ISI. So there's this much distrust, and the onus of the responsibility falls on our shoulder to be able to change that, to give them more and more and more confidence, and to go beyond the call of duty. But one thing that I believe very strongly for Pakistan's own security, because again, the first thing that a country's responsibility, the responsibility of the policymakers, is that nation's own security. There should be no compromise on it. I believe historically we have compromised our own national security for the sake of trying to believe that we can secure other countries, right? So I believe very strongly that we cannot take this business of not manning the border, wherever it is, with Afghanistan properly. This business of them blaming us for everything that goes wrong in Afghanistan has to end. And it can only end if there is, currently, anyone who doesn't have, which includes foreign journalists, locals, anyone who doesn't have a visa and a passport can cross over the border within seconds. God forbid if you have a passport and a visa, try and cross this border. It'll be virtually impossible. So what you need to do is the opposite of that. Then anybody who has a passport and a visa and is, biometric system, we tried to do, Afghanistan resisted it. Now, we resisted the fencing with the Indian border. Did it stop India from fencing? No. It didn't, because for them, their national interest requires that they fence the border. Now, if we feel that our national interest requires us to manage this border better, then we can't use excuses like easement rights and, historical realities to be superimposed on the reality of today. We have to protect ourselves before we go on to protect others. And I think by doing that, we will be able to, in some ways, protect ourselves and the Afghans and build the trust between the two countries in a much better way.
You think stabilization and consolidation of the government, the current regime, current government of Afghanistan is in Pakistan's interest?
Absolutely.
You don't think it's a...
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly what I said. That if the Afghans choose somebody to govern them, it is not Pakistan's business to have an opinion on it.
Right.
It is just not in our business to have an opinion on it.
Excellent. Moving on to... that's a historic perspective that yes, there was the use of non-state actors to pursue policy in Afghanistan. But later on, as we started experiencing problems in the 90s, it became apparent that things were, going to get more complicated. As you said, there was no exit strategy. 2001 onwards, it's been a much bigger problem. And one of the ways, issues that has come up is the use of drones to counter terrorism. You've always been a vocal opponent of the use of drones. Can you explain that?
Yes, I can certainly explain it. I will explain to you the way I explained it to a certain person who was a very well-informed person. And I will get into trouble by saying this once I said it in Asia Society, and now I'm not foreign minister, so headlines will not be made, but still. I do not underestimate the efficacy and the precision of drones as a vehicle or as a tool. Okay, so President Obama keeps on telling us they're precise and they're efficient. I agree with him. They're both precise and they're both efficient. As far as they are in Pakistani hands. Okay? Because you see, national security is much more complicated than we make it out to be. Okay, so now if you allow, for instance, the United States of America to use drone strikes today on North Waziristan to precisely and efficiently and effectively take out certain elements which are hostile to Pakistan's interest, I admit, right? You allow them that today. And you say that, issues of international borders, issue of international law, issues of who's military, where is the permission that was granted to them?
Right.
All of those issues are unimportant because right now we need to get rid of these people, right? So tomorrow, when they feel that, for instance, let's assume Ayman al-Zawahiri is in the heart of Islamabad, and they decide to bring choppers, as they did in Abbottabad, or drones inside Islamabad territory, then will your foreign secretary stand up and say, oh no, you went 20 kilometers too much into our space? Where will your boundaries be? So you make your country a very, very soft country when you let people go beyond what international laws allows them to do. And I just refuse to make light of it, and I just refuse to, because you see and this is what Pakistan has done, that we've let efficacy and the demands of today define what we do today, right? But it has a long-term ramification. Pakistan has today become, I think this will take like 3 minutes, but I think this is worth sharing. Maybe in 2007, I was at the World Economic Forum, Davos, the big forum, and over there, at that time, Pakistan economically was doing very well. Generally, Pakistan was believed to be doing everything right, etc. 2006-07, and there was a list published by the forum of possible 6 failed states in the future. Right? Now, Pakistan was at that time economically doing well, governance-wise, we were considered to be doing well, etc., etc. Pakistan found its name there. And we were shocked and surprised, and we went to the forum people and we said, how the hell did you drop this list? Pakistan is anything but a failed state. Now we figured, when they told us the details, that in all of those, the various elements that you used to make up the list, there was one thing only that Pakistan had which ensured Pakistan's name to be in that list. And that one thing was a country which does not have full control over its own territory. And I will be honest with everybody else here, I didn't understand the importance of that because at that time it wasn't an overwhelming problem which was striking us in the face. We knew, yes, the FATA area, there's some people they're the tribals and others. But that one element of not having control, now we know the price of that. Now we know that the same territory which you might want people to use for your goals and objectives, the same people will then use that territory against you. Kill your children with it. So where do you draw the line? So drone strikes is all about drawing the line, right? So to the US also, obviously it was that we don't have anything against drone strikes as far as Pakistani pilots which are manning it, or Pakistani, obviously nobody is piloting it, but it's Pakistan which is controlling it.
Right, because occasionally, if you take a list of the most wanted criminals, terrorists in Pakistan, whether it's Baitullah Masood, later Hakimullah Masood, there have been a lot of successes. It seems like maybe these were, being done on Pakistan's request or with Pakistan's information, or...
No, obviously, initially there was a great deal of acquiescence which was provided. There's no, it's been chronicled now. It's been proven, it's been said, it's been...
If Hakimullah Masood is assassinated, what, is that a bad thing?
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm not denying. But what I'm saying is, where will you draw the line then? How much into your territory will you allow them to come? Where... And with a superpower, you think you have the ability to draw the lines, and then we complain about Abbottabad. Abbottabad is a double whammer in many, many ways, but, where will you draw the line? How will you...
Right.
So it is your responsibility. You have to equip yourself to deal with the threats that exist within your territory. You can't outsource. Are you going to outsource your security to someone? That's exactly what we're doing.
What's happening, yeah.
So if we lack the strength and the ability and the capacity and the military might and the military resources, then we need to build those, all of the above, rather than outsource it to other countries, because then we lose control.
Yes, and the last question is going to be about the whole Abbottabad incident. You were the foreign minister at the time.
Yeah.
There was a lot of criticism, a lot of discussion on that. What exactly was going on in the minds of the policymakers? You must have been a part of those discussions.
Yeah.
What exactly happened the next day? How did you guys react? What did you talk about?
You know, I said this before. I think the only way to describe that is not shock or, you know, any other word, but I just use the words that we went still. You know, I say that
Right.
because it was just like out of obviously nowhere. It was something that you could not explain to yourself and therefore to your country and to the world, much more importantly. A man who had been the most wanted most wanted man in the world, on finding whose behest, you know, on the behest of finding him, Afghanistan had been attacked for the last 10 years, has been found not in the far-fetched, FATA, you know, sort of areas of Pakistan, but right in the heart of a city of Pakistan, and living rather well, right?
Right.
So it was obviously unexplainable in every which way, right? And of course, there's still, I think the jury is out there. I like to believe that from either, you know, people are great actors, or I'm very dumb. But from the presence of the people who immediately met after that, which included the army chief and the intelligence chief and the president and the prime minister and the foreign secretary and myself, you know, they obviously didn't.
They were stunned.
It didn't seem like any one of them knew, or some of them were great actors, either of the two.
Right.
So, yeah, I certainly know the political dispensation did not know. I like to believe that the military also did not know. I believe, I can say.
Right.
Because, and we didn't, and there was no way, how do you explain a thing like this? I mean, and typically, I don't know if there are any diplomats in this room, but, you know, once famously another foreign minister of another good country said me that, Minister, you have the best people in your ministry. You know, your diplomats are the best in the world. And I said, really, yeah, I like to believe, and I do believe the Foreign Office is a great, great institution. It's probably the premier civilian institution in Pakistan. So I said, really, yeah, I also like to believe it, but how do you say so? He said, they have done such a fantastic job in explaining the unexplainable for so long. Yeah? So that's our job, to explain the unexplainable.
Excellent. Thank you, Hina. I think we'll have 15 minutes left. Can we have some questions so we can explain the unexplainable a little more? Who has the mic?
Thank you. It was a very interesting and enlightening presentation, and you explained to us your role as a foreign minister. But like in the end, when you came to Osama, you talked about that you were caught unawares completely. Like, so do you feel that being in a foreign minister or a minister for state or foreign affairs, do you think things were in your control, or there were forces that did not allow you to pursue the policies that you believed in, that you were under certain restrictions, and therefore you were caught by surprise?
Okay, so if we were to assume that I was the only one who was caught by surprise, then that argument holds. But for the sake of this country, I like to believe that everybody was caught. I mean, or at least that's what we were told repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly, right? And as I said, either they're great actors or they actually did not know. Either of the two. Now, but going to the, you know, the spirit of your question, you know, I would not say this. I'm much better informed. Having served in government for 7 years, I didn't understand what it was like until the 2 years in the foreign ministry, because that's a completely different. And, you know, during our time, there was Salala, when our soldiers died and US refused to apologize. Right when I took over as Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, when the Raymond Davis incident had just happened, you remember Shah Mahmood Qureshi had just left. Then there was Abbottabad, then there was the Abbottabad Commission, then there was closing of the NATO supply route. So we went through a really tough time, right? And then it was us trying to normalize trade relations with India, which was a no-go area for anyone and everyone, and it was believed that it was carved in stone that we will not go in trade until we solve Kashmir, which we thought was ridiculous, because you have to create the environment for solving Kashmir. And we did it, right? So whereas I saw all the difficulties of being the foreign minister of Pakistan, right? I also saw that all the things that you really want to do, and if you believe strongly in your instincts, in the institution, and if you're able to talk back in the right way, at the strength of facts. I used to always say, explain to me logically and rationally, I will succumb to your explanation, right? But telling me this is the decision, I'm not taking it, right? Because so the thing that we did with Afghanistan and the thing that we did with India, and I can assure you, I did not spend, despite the fact that we had very difficult time with the US during that time, I didn't waste much time on the US or London even, because I thought the most important relationships of Pakistan are with Iran, with China, which we put a lot of attention to, would give a lot of attention to, with Iran, with Afghanistan and with India. And please don't underestimate the importance of trade normalization with India. I had people who told me that we don't know where these policies are made, and I said at the highest forum, the cabinet of Pakistan, the parliament of Pakistan, you tell me where else these should be made, right? So, and I didn't do it as a solo act. There were people in the Commerce Ministry, Mr. Zafar Masood, Commerce Secretary, who had a huge role to play, people within my own ministry, and I was just reading Khalid Mahmood, who passed away recently, a veteran, diplomat, his account of Kasuri Saab's time, in which also in the entirety of the Foreign Office believed that we should go forward on trade and economic relations. The entirety of the Foreign Office at my time also believed, but I had the confidence that the institution was supporting me because I used to consult them excessively. Let them argue it out. Let them thrash it out. Give arguments for or against. So that empowers me as a foreign minister. And then I can, do what I need to do, obviously with the backing of the political dispensation.
Can we have one question over here? The lady in the sunglasses.
One has been answered, Hina. I met you when you came with Shaukat Aziz to Singapore.
Oh, sure.
And from then on, I'd been meaning to ask my second question then.
Okay.
Because you said it's not my territory, but you briefly
Okay.
about the mountaineering. You were just describing your passion.
Sure.
From that area, and you were talking in your locality or your village. Things are about local government. So why is your party so resistant to give power to the local elected people here? Can you form a coterie of take Sharmila and Sherry and all these enlightened Pipians into that in your little group and empower the local government and tourism? You could now influence with your passion for mountaineering, PTDC, which is in the pits, through your government, through your two governments, Benazir. I was a People's Party student, activist also, but very disappointed. You ladies can make a difference other than foreign policy and bigger issues also. So please, tourism, look into that. Don't just go mountaineering. Take us along, make the roads.
Sure.
Thank you. And answer this a little bit, the local government.
Okay, on the local government, I think intrinsically and philosophically, the People's Party believes in local government, right? We haven't been able to get around to doing it. I think now, hopefully, the time has come where we will not be able to not do it, and it will happen. And I take your point very well on both the tourism side, but on the tourism side, please remember, and this is something which also, people used to often say the Foreign Office should present the soft image of Pakistan. I used to say, give me a soft image and I will present it. You cannot have bombs going on. Mountaineering, again, great believer in it from the point, I've been to the base camp of K2, to Rakaposhi, Nanga Parbat. Many people, I hope in this audience also have at least seen some of it. And again, how I could travel, I know my children can't travel today, right? Like that, right? That's a reality. Malam Jabbar was taken out by terrorists. That's also a reality. So we have to fix that problem before we start doing a Malaysia type of Truly Asia or Shining India or whatever campaign. That's the reality. I mean, when I don't find it safe for my children, how can I realistically and, passionately or honestly encourage others to send theirs? It's just a reality. Yeah, good idea.
Who's got the mic? Can we have a question from the left side? The gentleman in the blue shirt.
I have one question. There is a general perception that democracy could not take roots because of the strong feudalism, Vadera Shahi, Jagirdari, so on and so forth. Sorry. And as you belong to a family which is said to be a feudal family, do you think it really exists? The poverty ratio in Saraiki belt or the Saraiki Waseb or southern Punjab is very much high. Do you think that it's a main issue that power focuses on few families and the rest of the people living below poverty line? Is it true? I hope that you will.
No, I will try my best because I'm in some ways a stakeholder in this, and I will just at the very outset say my answer may not be the most correct one, right? Because I am representing what is considered to be a highly feudal family, right? I wish all feudal families were like that, who would allow their, at least their girls, so there are certain things which probably, but nevertheless, I think the problem here, there's no one type of feudal, and I like to believe we are all agriculturists. We have a certain profession, and that is that we own and till land. But there's no one type of, you can't label everyone in one way, but having vast land holding, if you're saying is that part of the problem, I think, can you put limitations on how much industry you make? Capitalist system is all about that, right? However, let me categorically say that the reason why the southern Punjab area has been so left behind is because the center has been very, very far away from southern Punjab, right? The center has been in Lahore, and the resources have never reached Punjab, my part of Punjab at all, and therefore we believe that if there is a Saraiki province or the southern Punjab province or whatever, that will really be able to correct the wrongs. And as much as you want to get rid of, which is fair, fragmentation of land has not left any feudals, not in Punjab anymore. I mean, if my father inherited, for instance, whatever number, I'm inheriting 1/10 of that, or 1/6 of it, or my children will inherit 1/4 of it, or so. In Punjab now, there's so much fragmentation of land that the way you believe generally feudalism to be doesn't exist anymore, to be quite honest, other than in books. And that's why I think it is really important for people who are in Karachi and Lahore to actually visit the villages. I mean, you will probably feel more, I don't look at them as the poor people, in terms of poor, not as in, monetarily poor, but the other way, because I think they have so much promise and they want so much more than is given to them. And therefore, in whatever way we can.
One more question. The gentleman in the brown shirt.
This thing turns out.
Brown shirt, please. Okay.
This is my question to you. Is there any possibility for the peace maintaining in Afghanistan? Or do you think that Pakistan and Afghanistan both can build a good relationship in future? But my second question is that you said that for maintaining peace in Pakistan, it's necessary to help for the maintaining peace in Afghanistan. But you linked that problem with Balochistan. You said that for the maintaining peace in Afghanistan, we must fix the problem in Balochistan.
Okay, I said that if we feel that we should have a role in Afghanistan and we have the powers to fix Afghanistan, we should first try and fix Balochistan, because Balochistan is also not a very happy place, right? So my point was to limit ourselves within our geographical boundaries of influence and not to seek influence beyond our geographical boundaries in terms of fixing lands, right? That's what I tried to say.
I think we can have one last question. Anybody? Yes, the gentleman in the brown shirt. We can't take all the questions at one time, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Turn by turn.
My name Abdul Samad, belong to Sahar Foundation Trust, Karachi. मैडम, आपने फरमाया कि सराइकी सूबे से कुछ आते नहीं, सदर भी आए, वजीर आजम भी आए, वजीर खारजा भी आए, मगर फिर भी डेरा गाजी खान डिवीज़न में ना यूनिवर्सिटी बनी, ना यूनिवर्सिटी बनी, ना मेडिकल कॉलेज बने. उसमें क्या रुकावट है कि सेंट्रल पंजाब मना कर रहा है कि साउदर्न पंजाब में नहीं बनेगी? तो फिर क्या पावर्स आप लोगों के पास?
नहीं, देखें, ये वाली बात है ना कि हम समझते हैं कि एक इंसान के आने से सब कुछ बदल जाता है. हम इंस्टीट्यूशन, आपको पता है कितनी ज़्यादा, मतलब मैं पंजाब की बात कर सकती हूँ कि पंजाब के डीप रूटेड दिस प्रेफरेंस फॉर सेंट्रल पंजाब, इतनी डीप, आप एक यूनिवर्सिटी लेके जाके क्या कर लेंगे? आई एम नॉट अंडरमाइनिंग द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ वन यूनिवर्सिटी. मैं आपको ये बताती हूँ वसूख के साथ कि प्राइम मिनिस्टर यूसुफ रज़ा गिलानी ने अपने दौर में मुल्तान में और इर्द गुना क्या क्या किस किस किस्म की डेवलपमेंट नहीं की, रोड्स, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, डेवलपमेंट्स, कॉलेजेस, एट्सेट्रा एट्सेट्रा। बहाउद्दीन ज़करिया यूनिवर्सिटी के 3 तो एक तो मैंने उनके साथ इनॉग्रेट किया था डेरा गाजी खान के करीब। तो ये चीज़ें हुई हैं, लेकिन जो एक जनरल स्पेसिफिक मतलब एक रेगुलर कोर्स ऑफ एक्शन में जो रिसोर्सेज जारी होती हैं, अब आप सिर्फ मुझे 2 मेट्रो प्रोजेक्ट्स के साथ पूरा वसेब, पूरा सदर्न पंजाब उसके बराबरी नहीं कर सकता। तो आप मुझे बताएं कि आप कहाँ से कह रहे हैं कि एक बंदे के आने से, मतलब अब मैं वज़ीर ख़ारजा रही हूँ, मैंने अपने इलाके में बहुत डेवलपमेंट कराने की शुरू, सनावे में विमेन स्कूल, विमेन कॉलेज बना लिया, एट्सेट्रा एट्सेट्रा। बट आई अंडरस्टैंड कि ये सब कुछ काफ़ी नहीं है, और सबसे ये जो डीप रूटेड सॉर्ट ऑफ अनफेयरनेस टुवर्ड्स वो जो नॉर्मल फंडलिंग ऑफ रिसोर्सेज हैं वहाँ जाती हैं, उसका मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकी और ना कुछ कर सकूंगी जब तक उनके रिसोर्सेज मुख्तलिफ नहीं होंगे। आई मीन हर किसी का देखें, एवरीबडी हैज़ देयर ओन ओपिनियन, राइट। मेरा ओपिनियन ये है कि पाकिस्तान में प्रोविंसेस बहुत कम हैं और एक प्रोविंस बहुत बड़ा है, और उस बहुत बड़े प्रोविंस की वजह से बहुत छोटे प्रोविंसेस फील लाइक दे डोंट ओन पाकिस्तान, राइट, एंड दैट्स नॉट फेयर।
Thank you. Just one more question. Do we have? Okay, the gentleman with the camera.
With the camera.
Can we have the mic over there? I think you're
Getting
here
upset.
in the next session too, so
Yeah.
I
That's
thought
fine.
5 minutes on there,
please.
इनको.
Yeah. Do what you have to.
I mean, wonderful questions were asked. If you permit me, can I ask you a personal question? You are such a beautiful blend of mind and body. As you said that you have walked and climbed, and you have fought with the foreign ministers and your own president. This needs a courage in a woman. So considering that, can I ask you a personal question, which nobody asked? I mean, where did you got this Sufi heart, where you feel for humanity, but is still not being used by the brilliant minds as somebody who can be a good guide? Is it because you are a woman, or because you are a daughter of a powerful man? Because being a daughter of powerful man does not say that you should not serve the country if you are not in foreign service. You speak brilliantly. I have heard in Columbia, Harvard, I lived there 16 years. You spoke brilliant. And why it is that Pakistan is not using you right now as an advisor into the women benefit and to the world? Why it is so?
I can just say what you said as a compliment of sorts, but I think we continue to play our role. Matlab, I would actually go the opposite way, okay? And I think it doesn't require you to be a foreign minister to play a role for your country. I think each one of us in the jobs that we're playing today, the role that I have today, okay, which might be multiple roles, okay, because I still go outside of the country and speak on behalf of Pakistan. I'm invited to speak at conferences, at Foreign Council of Relations, etc., and at forums. And I try and play that role as much as I can, right? And in a bipartisan way, because eventually we're all Pakistanis. But I think we attach too much importance to success as is viewed as success, right? Success which is obvious. My success is obvious, but there'll be so many women out there who will be much more than me, whose success is not as obvious as mine, okay, who will be breaking boundaries. I mean, I'm sure many of you, this is an Indian example, but the New York Times recent story of those 7 women who had to pay such a heavy price for getting out there from a beggar's community and working at a meat processing plant. They had to pay personal price, okay? It was such a heart-rending story. And in the villages of Pakistan and in the cities of Pakistan, women are doing this all the time. So in some ways, I think I'm not exception to the rule, I'm the rule. If anything, maybe worse than the rule. And there are many, many uncelebrated people. And as Pakistanis, I think we spend too much time in saying what the others are not doing. You know how John F. Kennedy famously said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So in some ways, in every role that we play, we can do something for our country.
Thank you very much for your comments and your time, Ms. Hina, Rabbani. Thank you for coming, for the attendance. We've out of time now, but please stay on. We're going to have another discussion also with Ms. Hina Rabbani and a few others on Pakistan-India relations right after this. Thank you, Hina. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance in this session. Our next session will begin shortly, and it's titled, What Keeps Us Apart?